Joining me now is risk analyst and former road accident fund contractor Stanley Bezuidenhout. Mr. Bezuidenhout, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Let's talk about your sense of how things are faring right now and what do you see as happening in this moment? Would you believe something like this happening at the road accident fund?
It's kind of funny that you asked the question, particularly that way. So yes, just to place it on record, I'm actually not surprised at all. I've worked with the Road Accident Fund. I've worked with several government organizations. I've been contracted to government. And I can tell you, and I've seen with my own eyes how decisions are sometimes made. I can tell you that the Road Accident Fund has been, I suppose, for lack of a better term, in trouble for a very long time. In fact, I was on the so-called interdepartmental committee for road accident victims, which discussed the model of the Road Accident Fund and how these problems can be resolved. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised to see it happening. And I'm kind of certain that while Mr. Letsoalo has done a lot to try and frame himself in a better light with his media statements today, that I'm looking forward for the SAU's further reports, perhaps the interim or the final report, to see exactly what they find.
I mean, what does something like this, however, do to the RAF? Because it's had situation after situation, it's had media scrutiny after media scrutiny, and concerns about whether it's able to pay out even on time, and now needs to have a significant amount of money to pay out to all those that have been impacted very quickly. And yet it's unable to do so. So something like this surely could further destabilize the fund itself.
Absolutely. And not only does it destabilize the fund, it actually technically destabilizes the country, because all of the people who are victims to road accidents are directly affected by this and in adverse ways. Imagine somebody losing all of their income, being so seriously injured that they're unable to work for the rest of their lives, and suddenly they're just faced with no compensation at all. Of course, the big question is not even how this could happen. I hear Mr. Letsoalo repeatedly saying he has saved the fund. I think he said 36 billion or whatever it is. The fact is, if you take the example of a fleet owner, if he suddenly decides that he's not going to maintain any of his vehicles at all, he'll certainly save money. But the question is, can the vehicles keep running? So the question is not how much money do we see balance moving this way or that. You cannot ignore the wrongs that are there if they are present just because there's some good. So it's kind of one of those two wrongs don't make a right scenario.
If this is the case then, how should we actually be safeguarding the Road Accident Fund? Are the processes of awarding contracts and tenders and the like, etc., is that process actually thorough? Is it a good process in itself, and is just being infiltrated then by wrongdoers in your sense then, Mr. Bezuidenhout?
The process confuses me completely. I've worked with government departments where I've been told, if you are the innovator, the sole innovator of a new technology that only you can provide and that can assist any government department towards saving billions, saving lives, or improving service delivery, the fact is that you are not allowed to approach that department to tell them it exists. Therefore, if nobody else does, you simply can't contract with them. So we've had the procurement processes and the tender processes made so stiflingly complicated that even good solutions cannot come to the fund, because everybody's living in the bubble for two reasons. The first is there are these ongoing concerns of mismanagement, poor management, misdirection of funds, which is in practically every department in South Africa by now. And on the other side, there's this problem with corruption and nepotism and strange contracts, etc. So how do we as the public benefit from a system that is so complex because it's so unreliable that it has to govern itself out of existence? That's the part that confuses me.
Yeah, so help us understand that system just a little bit better, if you will. There's a committee that decides certain things, particularly when it comes to this one with Moana Properties. There's a committee that makes the decision on who is going to get this particular contract, and that then has to just be ratified by the RAF CEO, or does it not need to be agreed to by the RAF CEO, and it just happens because the committee has decided what works best?
In my experience, the CEO always has the final word. Even my own contracts that I entered into with the Road Accident Fund, as much as we met in committees, as much as we had discussions about tender applications and tender compliance and tender approvals, at the end of the day, the final contract is signed off by the CEO. So in any organization where is a CEO that is in effect running the organization, the buck always stops back with them. So even if in the committee meetings or in the meetings where decisions are made, the decision processes are not properly followed, or perhaps some of the members are not even present and they just give proxy to, I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. Look, I won't be there, give proxy to this one and to that one. And before you know, there's only 4 or 5 people that are making decisions with proxies hanging, and then those people's wills are expressed. So that still comes back to the CEO. He's still the final person to decide, yes, we agree the money can go to this party and we followed all procedures.
What about the whistleblower? I mean, word supposedly then not just from the CEO, but also the CEO's spokesperson, the office is seemingly that actually this is all just a scenario in which the whistleblower is a disgruntled worker who had been previously caught up in another case previously and now is looking to put up a smear campaign of the CEO. Should we take anything from that, or is that just a bit of politicking that pretty much goes on within the RAF, you think?
Quite frankly, even the South African police has a so-called, crime hotline. The fact is that in almost a large, let's call it the larger percentage of internal, protected or confidential operations in any organization internationally, it's often whistleblowers that come forward and to raise concerns and shine the light on them. But more importantly, I think we mustn't be confused by the fact that the whistleblower was involved in another labor-related issue, sexual harassment or whatever the case was. That's not the question. Luckily, the SIU has the authority and power to investigate the allegations. And if they turned out not to be correct, well, then obviously it was a disgruntled ex-employee. But what if it doesn't? What if the evidence leads them down a path where the final conclusion is not that it's merely a disgruntled employee?
According to you, Mr. Bezuidenhout, what does the future sustainability of the Road Accident Fund look like, especially when one considers the insolvency and financial stability issues that it's currently facing?
In its current format, I'm telling you right now, I think it's doomed to failure. I myself, when I was on the committee, one of the key issues that I raised, and I've got to bring this up again, to the Road Accident Fund, it's going to sound like I'm rehashing old issues, but the fact is, if you don't have facts from the scene of the collision, if you don't have a proper investigation, a proper gathering of facts, you have these arguments between lawyers, his word against mine. Road Accident Fund lawyers love unclear claims. Attorneys love unclear claims because the minute the evidence is not trite and not self-explanatory, the minute it's not obvious, those two groups can get into big fights. The Road Accident Fund might pay less because the party doesn't have the capacity to prove, or the party might be able to claim more because the road accident is unable to disprove it. There was actually a project that was called Project Luft, locking up the facts. During that project, I investigated thousands of cases in the Eastern Cape, and you'll be shocked to hear that I heard from the financial executive at the time, Mr. Duncan Anderson, that there was a downward trend of nearly 80% in the number of claims coming out of the region, simply because of 3 things. Firstly, people knew they couldn't lie about the facts because we had photographic and all the evidence. Secondly, the so-called touts and attorneys and everybody that were working together to ensure that the higher number of claims were submitted had to think twice about doing that. And then lastly, eliminating those claims was quite easy because the evidence was right in front of them. And here we are so many years later, that project has been abandoned, and we still have all these arguments that are essentially taking place in the boardroom instead of bringing that argument right to the coalface, or rather to where the evidence should be collected. That's my biggest gripe with the current system, is the fact that we always rely on vague evidence, incomplete testimony, and poorly collected evidence, poorly managed evidence even, and even poor communication between the various entities that collect that evidence. And that's the sad reality with what that we are facing today.
So that reliance, does that ultimately mean we need better investigators? We should be funding the RAF a little bit better in terms of how it gets its fact finds as well, in terms of its fact-finding missions, etc., in terms of trying to get the right evidence for the cases in order to make the right decisions and not pay out more than is necessary.
Yeah, so we must be careful about saying a little bit more money, because every time you add a little bit more money, there's a little bit more that can go missing a little bit more often, if that is the case. Here's a big thing that people don't realize. The entities that are currently officially mandated to investigate road traffic crashes are the South African Police Service and the various law enforcement entities. Yeah. Their duty and responsibility is for the collection of evidence for the purpose of criminal prosecution. So they are not interested in civil liability. They are not interested in the road accident fund. Their systems, protocols, and procedures are not specifically written for civil litigation. It's written and developed for criminal prosecution. So while the evidence might work well in a criminal matter because you've got reasonable doubt and you've got, res ipsa loquita, which means the facts speak for themselves, and you can cross-examine witnesses, etc. When it works on the civil side of things, a lot of those investigations fall short, not because they didn't do their jobs properly, but simply because that's not their mandate and focus. So either the Road Accident Fund should have a unit in place or contracts in place or whatever mechanism in place to have those relevant pieces of evidence collected independently rather than rely on the system. And the system at the moment is also poorly designed. When a crash happens and somebody has a serious injury, it does not necessarily get investigated by the South African police. A single vehicle collision, a collision in which people are not arrested, is typically pretty much pushed to the side as far as the let's call it the bias is concerned. Now you speak to the detectives and the units that are supposed to investigate these cases. They're overloaded with work. Detectives don't have, firstly, the duty, or secondly, the wherewithal, or quite frankly, even the interest to pursue civil possibilities in these matters. So therefore, the civil element is left behind and a criminal element is focused on. And that divide is why everything is so blurry and so fuzzy, and why there's so much uncertainty about who can claim and how much can they claim.
It certainly just sounds like there's so much mixed reaction, mixed emotion, mixed everything ultimately when it comes to the Road Accident Fund itself. But ultimately, Mr. Bezuidenhout, just to confirm, you ultimately would not be surprised if the CEO of the Road Accident Fund, Collins Letsoalo, is indeed found guilty by the SIU or found to have been in breach then and having actually tried to make contracts ultimately go his way.
If you listen to him and his efforts at defending himself, he seems quite confident that that's not possible. But of course, as they say, the final analysis hasn't come out. I wouldn't be shocked or surprised, but I'd also like to go ahead and say that I can't say I predict that it will be the case. I certainly hope it isn't. And if it is, I hope that the appropriate, actions are taken to remedy this kind of issue as well.
Stanley Bezuidenhout, really appreciate your time this afternoon. The risk analyst and former Road Accident Fund contractor, joining us there for that conversation, of course, as we speak about the Road Accident Fund's CEO being implicated in what is a multi-million rand lease scandal there. And I mean, if you just take a look, 19 million rand for cleaning and security contracts, that's under probe. 313 million rand Sienza backlog project, also a probe. 40 million office furniture tender and a vehicle leaseback scam of around 5.3 million. All those and many more certainly under investigation.